The fighter. The image that usually comes to mind is that of a man. But women have always been present in and around the battlefield. In moments of rebellion, defence and offence alike. They have shaped wars in ways that history rarely records. Their roles often simplified or fetishised in popular narratives.
Ukrainian Joan of Arc. That title and her bright eyes and flaming red hair the army emblazoned on a patch they made for her.
What in the past was called the gentler sex, ISIS may have met its match.
Sulmara Martinez's outfit is made up of earrings, necklaces, and a 9mm pistol.
So what role do female fighters play? In an arena dominated by men, where do women fit in? The numbers show that around the world, women make up a far greater share of insurgent movements over national armies. So what are the motivations, struggles and circumstances that drive women to take up arms? And how significant is their impact on how battles are fought?
In many professional militaries today, such as those of NATO member states, women make up only about 15% of the ranks, a relatively small presence that continues to shape how most people picture women in war. Insurgent movements, however, tell a strikingly different story. Women composed roughly a third of the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka and as many as 40% of fighters in the Kurdish PKK and Colombia's FARC. That's not a coincidence, it points to something deeper. Women's role in war is far more diverse and far more complex than the stereotype suggests.
There's a dominant narrative that often casts women in conflict solely as victims. When women do take up arms, their actions are frequently dismissed as the result of brainwashing or coercion.
Nicole converted to Islam a few years ago, spending some time in Dubai. Now her grandmother believes she was brainwashed into going to Syria.
Or you'll have media reports that focus on surface-level narratives, like cute women with rifles in the PKK.
Probably a closer resemblance to like a girls' summer camp than what I would associate with usual military drilling.
But they rarely dig deeper.
Jessica Trisco-Darden examines women's roles in non-state armed groups.
Few ask the more probing questions about motivation, the details of the roles they play, their strategic involvement. The truth is that people, including women, often join armed groups for practical reasons, escaping poverty, unemployment, or personal hardship. Ideological commitment often develops later, during indoctrination or training. Crucially, many see an armed struggle not as a first option, but as a last resort, taken after peaceful avenues like voting, protest, or negotiation have failed.
Britan said she knew captured Yazidi women were being raped in Raqqa, and she wanted to help set them free.
What I find interesting is how states often struggle to integrate women into their armed forces or implement meaningful security sector reform. They claim there's no precedent, that they don't know how including women might affect cohesion or operational effectiveness, but history tells a different story.
Jacana Thomas examines women's participation in violent organizations.
The precedent exists, it's just been ignored. Rebel groups, out of necessity, have long embraced women fighters while states have been slower to adapt. While patterns vary, leftist groups generally show greater openness to women's participation.
Here in Colombia, decades of armed conflict have shaped both the country and its armed movements, the most prominent being the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC. A guerrilla army born from a leftist rural rebellion, it waged war against a state it accused of exploitation and violence. The FARC was never easy to define. In its half a century of existence, it gained a reputation for its tactics, appeal among impoverished Colombians, its role in the drug trade, and the unusually high number of women in its ranks. Victoria Sandino was one of them.
Las mujeres en las FARC desarrollaron un papel fundamental. Solo hecho de que pudiéramos tener un arma, eso daba ciertos niveles de igualdad. Cargábamos lo mismo, o sea, utilizábamos los mismos morrales, teníamos el mismo peso. Además, si se iba al combate, pues se iban hombres y mujeres.
The FARC is a fascinating case because it operated over such a long period. And what happens in decades-long conflicts is that people age out and new recruits are needed. That's one reason why women were increasingly brought into the movement. But this wasn't just a practical move. The FARC began incorporating causes into its platform, positioning itself not only as a movement for the rural poor, but also as one for women, indigenous people, and other marginalized groups. This helped broaden its recruitment base and deepen its appeal among populations historically excluded from power.
Even when women aren't fighting, they often serve on political committees or in vital support positions that sustain the movement from day to day. The FARC is a prime example. Their presence was not symbolic, it was central, because it's not just about who holds the guns. Behind them is a much broader network of supporters, people who cook, do laundry, fetch supplies, collect taxes, recruit, and fundraise. These individuals may not carry weapons, but they're critical to the group's survival. Often, women dominate these support roles too.
La mayoría del personal de salud, las enfermeras y médicas que curaban, que hacían cirugías, eran mujeres. También la transmisión de las comunicaciones que se hacía a través de radio HF. Ahora, ¿en dónde no estaban las mujeres? En las direcciones, en la comandancia. Llegábamos, yo duré 24 años en la insurgencia, pero había mujeres que tenían muchísimos más años y no dejaron de ser guerrilleras o tener un rango en la jerarquía pues, de comandancia muy bajo. Nunca nos dijeron que no podíamos llegar, pero nunca nos permitieron llegar.
For recruits like Victoria, joining the FARC was about participating in a political struggle. But, like many who speak out against established authorities, she soon became a target. Joining the FARC's armed insurgency in the mountains wasn't a choice. It was the only place she felt she could survive.
Al principio estaba haciendo de la lucha política, revolucionaria, organizando a la gente. Esa situación generó persecución, violencia, desplazamientos a mi familia, atentados, asesinatos a muchos compañeros, amenazas hacia la vida misma mía. Y pues yo me fui moviendo, me fui trasladando hasta el punto que ya no había otra alternativa. Es que era o quedarme aquí en Colombia en la vida civil, para que me mataran desarmada o irme al monte y por lo menos tener un arma y pelear pues por las transformaciones.
We also spoke with women fighters in Colombia's National Liberation Army, or ELN, the country's oldest active leftist guerrilla group. We asked what motivated them to join.
Veo mucha desigualdad, mucha injusticia en este gobierno, la mujer siempre sufre mucho. Aquí el valor de la mujer es muy importante. Aquí todos somos iguales, aquí se lucha por una sola causa, por toda la explotación, por todo. Entonces todo eso lo motiva a uno el día a día para seguir empuñando un fusil.
Una chica joven, por decirlo, en un territorio donde lo único que veía era que tenía que trabajar todos los días o tenía que vivir bajo la autoridad de sus padres, de su hermano, o conseguir una pareja muy rápido y también tener hijos a muy temprana edad y ver mujeres como diríamos hoy empoderadas, mujeres uniformadas, armadas, pues yo quiero ser así, ¿no? Había muchas chicas que ni siquiera podían ir a una escuela o no podían ir al colegio, no podían estudiar una carrera, pero llegaban a la guerrilla y sabían que podían aprender cosas, ¿no? En la vida civil no era posible tenerlas.
For those rejecting male-dominant norms, these armed groups can feel like a countercultural alternative. The same is true for the PKK in Turkey and Kurdish groups in Iraq, where communist-oriented ideologies attract women by challenging legal and social gender hierarchies.
Women's involvement in armed conflict isn't limited to leftist insurgencies. Paramilitaries initially arose in Colombia with backing from local elites and landowners aiming to counter guerrilla forces. Over time, they grew into powerful armed actors responsible for massacres, forced displacement, and other grave human rights abuses. I met with former fighter Ana Riveros.
Yo tomé la decisión de ingresar a la edad de 12, casi 13 años. Yo lo hice como una opción de vida porque mi mamá me abandonó siendo muy chica. Me dijeron que iba a comer 3 veces al día, que iba a aprender a manejar armas, que me iban a comprar ropa. Me decían que ellos me iban a proteger, que nadie más me iba a hacer daño. Así que no lo pensé 2 veces y sí. Si hubiera seguido en el campo allá, muy seguramente a los 13 años me hubiera ido a vivir con un campesino. Tendría 5 o 7 hijos. O en su defecto me hubiera ido a ser una prostituta de ese municipio en el que crecí. o me hubiera cogido la guerrilla y me hubiera llevado las malas. Adicional, si creces en una región que ha sido azotada por la guerrilla, creces con un resentimiento, ojo por ojo, diente por diente. Te ponen en una condición que o haces esto o esto. O sea, el panorama no era muy bonito, en especial para las mujeres.
Then there are the burdens women carry in armed groups, no matter which side they fight for. Many endure their periods in unhygienic conditions with limited access to sanitary supplies or medical care. Some are forced to have abortions or give up their children, while others are denied the chance to have them at all.
Y una de las cosas terribles es eso, el tenerlos, el tema menstrual dentro de la selva, el cuidarse, que no sobrepase otro compañero con uno. Yo no me sentí que fui mujer allá. Hasta el momento en que me enamoro de un hombre, tengo un noviazgo, quedo embarazada. Me dijo el comandante militar que me sacaba en una zona urbana. Me dijo, listo, téngalo. Usted lo puede tener, está con él hasta los 6 meses, que uno lo destete. Usted verá si lo regala, lo vende, lo dan a adopción, pero acá vuelve. Y como yo sabía que las órdenes en la organización se cumplían o se hacían cumplir, lo dejé con una persona y llegué otra vez al bloque.
La gente afuera piensa que nosotros funcionamos, por ejemplo, como funcionan las fuerzas militares. Es un batallón, tú vas de permiso, aquí no. No, porque al nosotros ser una organización ilegal para el Estado, en el cual entonces tú desde el primer momento que llegas ya tienes un seguimiento por parte del enemigo, entonces nosotros nos vemos obligados a dejar nuestras familias. Entonces no es fácil.
Silvana may still be an active fighter today, but for Victoria, war did not end in victory or defeat. It ended with a peace agreement that transformed fighters into politicians. In November 2016, the FARC laid down their arms and became a political party, ending over 50 years of conflict with the Colombian government. Women like Victoria were key to the peace process, pushing for negotiations, protecting fragile talks, and making sure former female fighters' voices weren't sidelined.
Los medios de comunicación maltrataban a las mujeres, las estigmatizaban, les decían víctimas, o sea, de todo. Y pues una mujer guerrillera obviamente que no sentía que fuera eso, nada de eso, ¿no? Entonces empezamos como a diseñar una estrategia de medios para posicionar como el pensamiento político de las mujeres guerrilleras que estábamos allá en La Habana.
The final agreement of the Colombian peace deal was unprecedented. It included over 200 mentions of mujer, woman, and more than 50 mentions of gender. Most peace agreements focus on things like demobilization and troop reintegration, not gender-specific provisions aimed at improving women's post-conflict status. What's remarkable is that FARC women were key to ensuring that gender provisions were included. And they didn't just advocate for women in general, they prioritized Afro-Colombian, indigenous, and rural women who might otherwise have been excluded. And thanks to its recency, we also have rare insight into their thinking. The Farianas, FARC's women fighters, created a website to share manifestos, promote insurgent feminism, and speak openly about their ideology, motivations, and contributions.
Colombia has a long history of peace agreements with different armed groups. While the success and longevity of these agreements have varied, demobilization has consistently confronted the same gendered challenges.
Women returning from conflict face more than the usual complexities of reintegration. These processes, like so many others, are highly gendered. The key issue often is that they're returning to societies that don't reflect the equality that they've experienced within the armed units. If you've fought side by side with men, being told to go home and sew or focus on caring for family can be jarring. There were other issues specific to women that also came up, like those wanting to reclaim children they'd given up during the conflict. All too often, there weren't any good mechanisms to deal with these matters.
Colombia tiene una política pública de reintegración muy bonita en el papel, pero vamos a la implementación, es un desastre. Y sale uno y no tiene herramientas, no tiene familia, dinero, la institucionalidad es muy apática, la sociedad, nada que ver. Cuando nosotros nos desmovilizamos y llegamos a una oficina, encontramos muchos doctores encopetados y muchas doctoras que no tienen idea de lo que es la vida o lo que uno ha pasado. Entonces existe algo de empatía que carecen las entidades. Vienen los diferentes cursos. En mi momento, por ser mujer, debía hacer cursos de belleza. Yo recuerdo que le dije a la tutora en ese momento, Marica, yo hace 3 meses solté un fusil. ¿Usted me ve cara de estar peinando viejas? Yo siempre, por haber sido militar, soy muy reaccionaria. Entonces, a mí no me gusta algo, yo lo voy diciendo. Soy muy directa y quizás no tengo filtro. Y yo siempre resistente porque las mujeres tenemos que hacer lo que la sociedad considera que tenemos que hacer por mujeres, por el simple hecho de ser mujer. Yo les dije que yo quiero ser mecánica de Transmilenio, de aprender a arreglar buses y camiones. Niña, ¿qué es eso? Usted es una señorita, usted ya no está en el monte. ¿En serio? ¿Por qué no aprovechamos ese liderazgo, esa fortaleza que tenemos las mujeres?
La reincorporación ha sido desigual, y particularmente para las mujeres, porque muchas de las mujeres que llegaron a los espacios territoriales, que eran los espacios donde los compañeros y compañeras fueron a hacer el proceso como de tránsito a la vida civil, tuvieron que salir porque muchas tenían hijos o sus padres eran ya personas adultas mayores, muy mayores, y ese rol del cuidado de la familia, de los padres, de los enfermos y todo esto, se los otorgaron a las mujeres, como parte de todo este sistema pues patriarcal que tenemos en nuestro país y en el mundo entero.
There's this idea that war is a masculine pursuit and women shouldn't have been a part of it, so they face stigma male ex-combatants often don't. But if we refuse to reintegrate these women, what options are left? Pushing them out of society increases the risk that they'll turn to illicit activity, which only deepens instability. The other major issue is that hundreds of ex-combatants have been killed in recent years, and it discourages others from laying down their arms. Beyond needing food and income, people need to feel safe. Why would anyone disarm if they think it'll get them killed?
Cuando yo me movilicé, a los 2 años me ofrecieron volver. Y yo aquí ganándome un mínimo, y a mí me ofrecían 3 veces un mínimo. ¿Qué hace uno? Si yo no hubiera sido mamá, si yo no hubiera tenido esa raíz, ese apego a esta vida por mi hijo, yo no estaría acá.
Colombian women remain active across many fighting fronts. Some remain involved in active conflicts like those with the ELN and other armed groups that have resurged since the peace process. Many are immersed in the battleground of politics, while others are just fighting for a sense of normalcy in civilian life. Their paths are complex and varied, but their experiences as women in conflict is something that they share in common. And as for the longer-term struggle for proper recognition and gender equity, well, that's a battle that's far from over.
Over in the other hemisphere, the spectre of war has grown more ominous.
Here in Taiwan, there has been a long-running conversation, a realisation, that citizens need to be prepared for war well before it even begins. Civil defence groups have been training people in first aid, emergency response and basic defence. Women have been some of the most active participants, reframing ideas about who defends a nation and how.
In the traditional army mindset, men are conscripted by law. They know that if the war breaks out, then they will have a very clear role to play. This lack of defined wartime role for women has led many of them seeking one for themselves.
Wen Lu is a scholar, writer and activist based in Taipei.
Traditionally, we think of war as something that happens on the front line. So soldiers fight and civilians stay in the back. But with the rise of the gray zone conflict and hybrid warfare, civil society is increasingly under attack through disinformation, cognitive warfare, airspace violations, and even undersea cable sabotage. So these aren't conventional acts of war, but they still demand an active defense strategy.
When men are called to fight, women often become heads of households, taking on responsibilities for their families and economic survival, filling the roles men leave behind. While many women already have practical skills, acquiring new ones, especially in self-defense and survival, becomes essential. War is transformative, but it's also deeply damaging for women, who are frequently targeted with sexual violence used as a weapon of war worldwide. In this context, women preparing to protect themselves isn't just practical, it's vital.
This is the Kuma Academy in Taiwan, where ordinary people, mostly women, train in civil defence. Everything from modern warfare awareness and information security to first aid, rescue skills and evacuation planning.
For a long time, the military has been linked to a very masculine idea that only men have access to and knowledge of defense, while women should be passive, waiting at home to be protected or rescued. But what we have found is most participants in this workshop are women, mostly between 30 and 45 young professionals with families or children. So I believe that the grassroots civil defense movement has truly changed that masculine dynamic. Women are out there training, educating others, taking classes.
甚至有可能在进入战争的时候，很残酷的，女生的身体往往是对方敌人力量会想要破坏的一个很主要的目标，因为它破坏了你的身体，你的身心就会受创，然后甚至你有可能会带来后续更大的对整个社会的创伤。所以女生之所以要保护自己，我觉得不妨，因为你学会了一些事情，就算你真的没有办法上战场去打仗啊，或者什么之类的，但是你在后方，你提供的是一个安定社会的力量。
At Kuma, we also have a class specifically for women during wartime. We discuss what types of sanitary products to prepare, how to avoid risks, how to have safer sex, things that people don't usually think about in conflict situations. If you mobilize women, you mobilize the whole society. If you haven't, it means you're not fighting hard enough.
The reality is most people won't be on the front line, but if they feel prepared and have basic supplies, they're more likely to resist occupation psychologically and emotionally. That kind of resilience is essential to preventing a quick takeover, even among civilians.
A range of civil defence courses have been proliferating across Taiwan, and since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, interest has surged, especially amongst women.
We draw many lessons from Ukraine because Taiwan's situation is similar. About 20 to 30% of people still identify as both Chinese and Taiwanese. China exploits this by pushing narratives like we're blood relatives who cannot be separated. Since Xi Jinping's took office, China has used three key tactics. First, public opinion warfare aims to sway sentiment by promoting the idea that integration brings prosperity. Second, legal warfare. Third, psychological warfare aims to make China seem unbeatable and Taiwan's defense hopeless. The first step is breaking through that psychological barrier.
其实他一直在透过像今天课程有讲到的，就是资讯战，还有就是类似舆论啊这些，就已经在侵略我们台湾人的思想，让应该要做的事情。虽然不是真的直接去作战了，但我觉得对抗资讯战，我们每一个人都是很重要的角色。
会啊，当然会很紧张啊。像之前大家都一直说2027台湾就是中共就是要打台湾什么之类的。那其实仔细想想的话，还有2年的时间嘛，因为现在是2025。那除了在上这个课之外，其实我在自己家里有准备一些那种什么救难包啊，或者是一些很长时间的应急的食物，或是一些反正就是发生战争需要逃难的时候，我可能会需要用到的东西。我觉得那是我目前可以做的啦。那就是更多的话，当然就是说，在积极参与这种课程，然后向你身边的人去广发这样的讯息。
This shift also focuses us to rethink who belongs in defense. Women, long excluded from traditional security spaces, are now playing central roles, not just as supporters, but as leaders, strategies, and frontline responders. Their growing participation is helping reshape the civil-military relationship into something more inclusive and representative of the democratic values it's meant to protect. It is not the kind of militarism we usually imagine. It is something quite different.
The will to fight isn't innate. It is shaped by innumerable factors in the world that people live. Look across countries and movements, and it becomes clear that women's involvement in conflict is so much more complex than the neat stereotypical narratives we hear so often suggested. All of this leaves us with an urgent question. Why is humanity facing so many situations in which violence feels like the only option?
The social contract, where the state provides services in exchange for legitimacy, often breaks down in conflict zones. That creates grievances armed groups know how to exploit. When people's basic needs are met, there's no disaffected pool to recruit from. So the issue isn't just geopolitics, it's governance.
When governments crush civil society, peaceful alternatives disappear and armed actors step in. So rejecting violence isn't about individual choice, it also depends on states allowing peaceful dissent. I believe peace is possible, but convincing people of that is still a long road.